Welcome everyone, I'm Manny, the Dungeon Master for Feats Fantasies, Cataclysm Rising, a homebrew campaign for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that I made from scratch with little to no prior knowledge of how world building or campaign crafting worked. And that was a mistake. I started Cataclysm Rising with very little experience DMing and only world building and writing for my own personal satisfaction. Making a world with little prior knowledge on how things like the founding, logistics, cultures, how all of that would work definitely had me hit a snag when my players started asking questions about my world that I had no real answers for aside from I just wanted to make that. So after years of playing D&D as a DM and as a player, I've definitely learned a bit more about world building and campaign crafting, and I think that started to get better after I built a major city in our campaign setting, the City of Les Gevas. I like to run you through how I made the city and why I added what I did so hopefully you can make your own cities feel lived in and have hooks that your players can bite into. So in the beginning, my players didn't really find the cities and settlements that I made very interesting, and that's ultimately my fault in the beginning. At the time, I didn't know what a city really had in it to make it a city, aside from a lot of buildings and a lot of people. So when making a city, you need to ask yourself, what are those buildings aside from just being houses? If there are also businesses, what kind of businesses are they? If there are landmarks, what makes it so important that it counts as a landmark? Where do the criminals go? Where are they tried? Where are the seats of power? What does everyone do for fun? And weirdly enough, a city like Les Gevas kind of solved a lot of those answers for me. When I first made the city, I kind of just jumped in and did it, and that was a mistake. So the first thing I should have done when making a city for the first time was reading the source books. The 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide has a section in Chapter 5 dedicated to settlement building, from the population numbers to a random number table of various buildings and their purposes to styles of governments and the reason the cities exist. The 2024 version of the Dungeon Master's Guide now has the free city of Greyhawk as an example as well. Now when it came to seriously city building, I found these 3 books from D&D 5th edition as great inspirations. Baldur's Gate, Descent to Avernus, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and Eberron, Rising from the Last War. All of these books have whole chapters that act as gazetteers talking about what would be in a city that fills in the blank spaces between people's homes. So the various districts of the city, their cultures and people, forms of governance, crimes, laws, criminal organizations, what kind of businesses and guilds there are, as well as holidays and other celebrations. These were all huge inspirations to me when making Les Gevas and future cities in my world. But more on that later. The point is that knowing how the books themselves formatted their information really helped me organize putting my thoughts to paper when trying to build my own city. That said, organization also helps when making a city as well, and having sections dedicated to specific parts of the city also helps. I used World Anvil because their article editors had sections dedicated to specific categories of the city, things like economy, defenses, infrastructure, tourism, etc. So if I felt like there was something missing from the city, I could just look at the list and start filling it in. One time I was asked, is anyone actually going to care about any of this? And initially I thought, yeah, that's true, they're probably not going to care. But even then, I still went ahead and put the time and energy into prepping the lore of the city and world. And as a result, I now have the resources to answer offhand questions from players. Are they going to wonder where they can go to find ceramics? Are they going to ask you what the export rate in mangoes are if they sell them in the city? You know who you are. If they do, I am prepared enough to actually have an answer. Now you might hear from other DMs to not plan your story ahead too far since your players might not get there or even want to go there, and that's all advice. But I personally don't think it's a bad idea to have an environment prepared so that you can account for any potential locations your players might want to go to. They don't even need to be fully fleshed out things like the history of its founding, all the residents' name and their mother. Just a sentence about what this place is and what it does will be enough for you to at least springboard into improving what actually goes on here. So do they want to go somewhere to find information? Well, glad I made this library or tea house. Do they want to find a place where they can get vaulted potions? There's a guy named Jacques with a shack on the beach who mixes potions. Improv is a natural part of D&D, but it never hurts to be prepared and have a prompt. Those prompts being those locations with purpose that you just made prior to the game. And when making Les Gevas, I had plenty of short blurbs to tell me what I was presenting to my players and winged it from there if it was ever needed. If this is already giving you your own ideas for your own settings, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications because on top of our usual podcast, we're going to be doing a lot more videos like this one, where each of our players and GMs give context and talk through their own processes of preparing to play in TTRPGs. Now, to understand Les Gevas, you'll need to understand the setting of Cataclysm Rising. Cataclysm Rising is set in a world that exists several millennia after a great calamity that set civilization back just as much. Between then and the time we're playing our game, empires have risen and fallen, people have explored and settled, and magic is returning to the world. In our current playthrough of the game, the players are on a continent called Caledonia within a territory known as the Drexel Empire. The Drexel Empire is a pretty cut and dry iteration of an empire with an empress and a capital city as the seat of power, with the reach of the empire extending across the entire continent with allied countries nearby. The empire is divided into territories with government officials ruling those territories, with smaller local governments underneath them who all swear fealty to the empress. Thus, many of the cities have a mayor, governor, and lower government, with the allied countries having king and councils. Typical fantasy setting stuff. When the party had a chance to travel to different locations within Caledonia, I wanted to make something different for my players that showed the contrast in cultures and values from the empire territory that they become familiar with, as well as something that they would hopefully find interesting enough that they wouldn't just want to speed through it. Thus, Les Gevas was born. Caledonia has environments influenced by North America, so before visiting Les Gevas, the party were in an area called Timbervault, which is a country up in the cold north. So when the next leg of their journey was established, I decided to let them go somewhere warmer, and made Les Gevas coastal city within the Greater Marais territory, which is a humid, swampy marshland in the south. And that gave me the idea of adding elements of New Orleans, helping to embellish the city and its surrounding areas a bit more. However, when it comes to actually making Les Gevas, I wanted to make a city that was familiar to me and my players, who are all from Las Vegas. So I took inspiration from various locations around our home and added my own flair to them. I had to ask, what landmarks and locations can I add magical flair to? Taking some time to learn a little bit more about the city and seeing if there's anything in its history that I can add into Les Gevas or as a campaign plot really helped in the development of the city and a session of play. Las Vegas has a history of being run by the mob at some point, so just like with Fallout New Vegas, when making Les Gevas, I cut out the middleman of local government and just made the whole city an oligarchy independent from the empire. It's run by 3 families who own 3 major casinos in the city, with each of them governing their own district. Making each family run a different casino and district also allowed me to add some flavor to the city by making each district an extension of the casino's theme. Octavius' Manor is basically Caesar's Palace, so making the surrounding neighborhood look like a Greco-Roman city made sense. The Red Cap Corner is based on the French Quarter and Storyville districts of New Orleans, with brick buildings and metalwork filigree, as well as a little something extra. The Opal Lily is a fancy location where the most affluent live and spend their money. Thus, the neighborhood here is filled with stately antebellum manners and is kept in pristinely clean conditions. The only other district with an actual government is the Myriad, but it has a complicated history that allows its independence from the families. Now, going back to filling the spaces in between. Initially, I had no idea what to put there, but thanks to reading gazetteers on previously established cities like Baldur's Gate, Waterdeep, Sharn, things like bathhouses, temples, prisons, barracks, theaters, general stores, etc., those were the things I realized were missing. And since we've nicely themed each district to a specific niche, we can theme the various businesses and services to that district as well. The upper class Opal district, home of the Opal Lily, can have shops full of valuable and expensive clothing or magical items. The Crimson Quarter, home to the Red Cap Corner, caters to hedonistic pursuits, so maybe alchemists that sell potions and salve for fun times, and leather workers who make equipment for really fun times. The Rione region, home to Octavius' Manor, can have stores that sells weapons and armors, or wine and food from antiquity. Having an idea of what the city was all about and what its overall purpose is helped me fill in the gaps as to what's actually there, and narrowing down districts to a specific purpose or themed influence what kind of establishments might be found there. Sometimes you might even create a place just for it to be relevant to your plot or to your player's backstory. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's convenient, and it helps fill the world even if it isn't fully fleshed out. You and your players can always think about its role in the world after the fact if you ever feel like you need to revisit it. For example, Big Bob's Bad Guy Emporium. That might be a place where the players here are villain they're looking for frequents, and now they found him and dealt with him, Big Bob's Bad Guy Emporium just kind of falls to the wayside now that it served its purpose. But if you think a little too hard on it, the existence of Big Bob's Bad Guy Emporium implies some kind of establishment within the world where someone can just shop for a bad guy. So is this like a temp agency for villains? Is this where people go to get henchmen? Is it actually just a tavern bad guys frequent and the owner has a sense of humor when it comes to names? Well, this is stuff you can think about after the fact, should the players want to revisit it, or it can help influence certain ideas into your world. Maybe this world, or at least this city, does have a job market where being a villain or a henchman is a viable career path, and Big Bob's is just one of the places to go to just for that. So if there's an agency for bad guys, does that mean there's an agency for heroes as well that isn't just an adventurers guild? Stuff to consider that happens during the middle of world building. Just like how you might not know how a character you planned is going to be like when you first start playing them, you won't always know what your world is going to be like until you and others have started playing in it as well. So, even though Les Gevas was made exclusively for the campaign setting of Cataclysm Rising, I like it enough that I might want to bring it back in a different campaign. However, that begs the question, how can I make it work in a pre-existing campaign setting like the Forgotten Realms or Eberron? Or even a different homebrew setting in my own making? Well, since we've already established that Les Gevas is a coastal city in and around a swamp, finding an empty patch of coastline or swampland is a good place to start. We've established that Les Gevas is a self-governing oligarchy that has defined territorial borders, so maybe wherever the swampland you plop Les Gevas in, its natural boundary of the swamp is the realm Les Gevas has claim over. As for the city itself and its purpose within your world, you can use it as a place to brick and mold. Since it's an independent nation with its own culture and values, use it to show the contrast between whatever established society you've already introduced your players to. Les Gevas has casinos, so maybe if you and your players want to run an Ocean's 11 style heist, just like we did in Cataclysm Rising, but there's no casino-like establishment anywhere in your world, Les Gevas is a convenient setting to do that in. Les Gevas can also be a major trade hub where a considerable amount of goods and resources travel through. Maybe your players need to track down an item that's contraband in their land, but maybe it can be found through a network of smugglers in Les Gevas. Les Gevas makes use of the surrounding swampland's natural resources like lumber and clay, so if you need a small town for the players to start in or travel through along the way when marching through the swamp, you can use a resource town that sends all of its goods to Les Gevas. Now, you may be wondering, how am I going to come up with all these businesses, criminals, guilds, and resource towns? Well, thankfully, I have an answer for that. If you're looking for more than just my one-sentence blurbs to start using Les Gevas in your own campaign, why not grab the fully fleshed out Les Gevas setting PDF for free on our Patreon. You can find a link in the description below. This document goes into further detail about Les Gevas, the casinos, the districts, the people, and everything you need to include it in your own game. Thanks for taking the time to watch our video on building Les Gevas. I hope it gave you some ideas to help you start building your own homebrew setting, and if you want to hear all the adventures in Les Gevas, go check out our podcast. It's been a real labor of love that we are really, really proud of. Thanks again.